Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Rausan Pereira. Over the last few months, protectionist tendencies have resurfaced. The latest being US President Donald Trump imposing import tariffs on steel and aluminium. The move has seen strong reactions from American allies, namely the EU and Japan. Trump renewed his demand last week that the European Union halts its trade barriers to US products in order to spare his allies new steel and aluminium tariffs. The American president made his comments after crunch talks in Brussels between EU negotiators and the US trade representative in an effort to defuse a bitter row that many fear could turn into an all-out trade war. The looming trade war is expected to have serious implications across the world. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the return of trade barriers. Joining me on the program today are Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO, Federation of Indian Exports Organization; Ajay Shankar, former Secretary DIPP; and SK Sarkar, Managing Committee Member, ASSOCHAM. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Shankar, I'd like to begin with you, of course. Firstly, let's try and understand if a major trade war is looming.
I don't think so. But what we are seeing is President Trump demonstrating his commitment to his election promises. So in spite of all the uncertainty around his style of working, he has been consistent in implementing each one of his election promises. So he has implemented this election promise.
So why has it caught the European allies in Japan by surprise?
What they had all expected, and which is not unusual, that once you are in office, the establishment of that country persuades you on what is desirable, and you go a little slow on some of your election promises. Now, Mr. Trump has been demonstrating on many fronts that he is not allowing the Washington establishment to moderate his positions, and he is consistently implementing his election promises.
And we'll see that in the case of Tillerson as well.
And the other surprising thing is that his own party, which has been a great one for free trade, is so far going along with him.
Sure.
But I still feel that a trade war is not imminent because far too much is at stake for a real trade war. And I think none of the trading partners of the US really want a trade war. So they would keep hoping that Mr. Trump will not go too far and they would somehow be able to contain or manage the damage, and hope that the core of the international trading system survives.
Sure. Let me bring in Ajay Sahai now to the picture. Ajay Sahai, what has led to the present situation?
So in fact, it has been rightly said that when you are bringing the policy of America first, you want to propel manufacturing in the country. And this is something which is not new to US. When Mr. Bush came to power in 2002, he also increased the duty on steel from 0 to 1% to 8 to 30%. And there also, he cited the reason that he was given an opportunity to Indian as a US steel maker to look into the challenges and come up to the terms. But unfortunately, that has not succeeded. Protectionism can help you if you have investment in the pipeline or the new investment is flowing into a sector. But if sector is firmly established, I am firmly of the view that this kind of raising tariff will not lead to any result. Secondly, I feel that when Mr. Trump started, he was targeting all the countries with whom he has a trade deficit of more than $25 billion, including Canada and Mexico. But now in this promulgation, he has excluded the NAFTA partner. If you look at the total profile of imports of steel and aluminium, US is importing close to $75 billion of these items. $20 billion comes from Mexico and Canada. And once you are increasing the tariff to 25% or to 10%, your FTA partners are getting more advantage. So he is basically facilitating more import from these FTA sources, maybe at the cost of European Union, Brazil, Australia, China, Japan, and India also. But in fact, we are not a big player Of course, if you are looking in India's export to US, in that term, US is a very important market for us. But if you look at the US import profile, we are not a major player in the market. If you look into the steel item, in prime steel, our share is around 1.2%, in steel product around 2.9%, in article of aluminum and aluminum product is around 1.12%. So I don't think that we have major stake into that. But the message which he is giving is something which is dangerous. If you can go above the bound rate commitment, that means you are clearly violating discipline of the WTO.
Okay.
That is a dangerous.
Right. We'll get into that. We'll get into the WTO, what the WTO rules and norms state, and also what does, this particular move mean for India. But before that, let me bring in SK Sarkar. What Trump is saying, Mr. Sarkar, do you believe that it is justifiable, it is doable? Is he just playing to his audience at home, or is he serious about this?
Well, I don't think he's playing to his audience at all, because according to me, he's not a blue-blooded politician by any stretch of imagination. Yes, he's made some campaign promises and he wishes to carry them out. We saw that happening with H-1B visas, and then now he shifted to the tariffs. And I have this. I've been told that the next target would be electronic parts, mobile phones, computers. Basically, that's which are Chinese of Chinese origin.
So basically, targeting all the trade deficit countries.
Yes. So that is what is. But you see, what happens is that when you in a trade war, actually nobody wins. Everybody loses. And what he is doing today is actually going to hit his friends rather than China. EU is obviously his friend, and so that could have an effect, because EU now says that they are threatened to put tariffs on peanut butter, bourbon, denims. And
some strong reactions coming in from US allies, especially the EU and Japan as well.
So they're just threatening right now. So they're not carrying it out to the extent. I hope they don't. It doesn't get to that kind of a situation, because the global trade is going to suffer in the process. So that is something which we have to. But let's go back to Trump. You see, Trump, the Congress does not have a role in this, because Congress has shifted all powers to the executive. Over the decades. In fact, even if you go back to Barack Obama, he also imposed some tariffs on steel imports from China in 2016. But the grand old party, which is the Republican Party, is now doing some kind of a rethink on the whole thing. It is not that he has the support of his party totally and completely, and they are likely to bring in some legislative hurdles in his way, so that so that they can put a stop to all these things. Because after all, you see, if you do not have proper global trade, you cannot be a superpower by any stretch of imagination. So that's something which we need to be very careful about. And of course, this is just for the viewers. This is from he's done this under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. And he says that he has done this in the interest of national security. And he also says that they are the bedrock of our defense industrial base. Now, whether it is how far he is correct, we do not know. He has not put in a sunset clause also as to when is this going to end. So these are factors which are a little disturbing, in the sense that we are left in a little bit of a suspense.
Sure. Let me bring in Mr. Shankar now. We've been talking about protectionism, both the speakers, in fact, all of you all have spoken about protectionist tendencies. That was not the case a few years ago, Mr. Shankar. Why is it that things have changed in the recent past, and countries such as the US and other countries as well are becoming far more protectionist?
What has happened in the US is, in the last 30-40 years, real wages of the working class, or what they call the middle class, has not been rising. There has been growing inequality. And in the globalized world, according to that narrative, jobs have moved out in manufacturing to China and in services to India. And therefore, the American middle class, which voted in a large measure in hardcore democratic states for President Trump, voted for the promise that jobs will be brought back to America, and in the hope that real wages would also rise. So that's the underlying problem with globalization, that the countries which were the great advocates of globalization, which sought opening up of markets in the emerging countries or the developing countries, both EU and the US, find that when globalization succeeds beyond a point, then the countries whose markets you have opened up become centers where economic activity becomes competitive enough, and at much lower wages they compete with you. And therefore, then you feel that globalization is not such a good thing. So today, the real beneficiaries, or those who have the maximum stake in globalization, is China, number one, who is the largest exporting country in the world, and their markets are in the US and Europe. And India to some extent in the services side, and potentially in the whole range of goods and services, because we are a low wage developing country and we are acquiring competitive strength and capabilities across a wide range of activities. So the protectionist tendency and its appeal to ordinary people is now in those countries which were initially the greatest votaries of globalization, and it flows from also the growing inequality. So if the top 1% of USA had not been gaining in wealth and gaining in wealth, these sentiments would have been weaker. So you have the welfare state under retreat, difficulty of funding it, growing wealth inequality. So the narrative of bringing jobs back has great appeal.
Indeed. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Sarkar.
I just wanted to add to what Mr. Shankar was saying, that let's look at the view which is given by the Commerce Department of the US government. They are saying that the viability is actually possible at 80% capacity utilization, and which is not happening. In fact, they've given some examples also. They're saying there's just one company which makes naval armor plates for the Virginia class submarines, and they have only one smelter which produces high purity aluminum for defense aerospace. So these are the conditions that these are the reasons that they are giving over here. One point which I would like to make over here is that if you look at the FOB value of Chinese imports into US and compare it with the CIF value of US price, it actually the difference is about $175 per ton. That will wither away with this 25% on steel. I'm talking about steel.
Yes.
So on that steel, it will go away. And the other point is that on NAFTA, you see, if you look at Canada and Mexico, Canada is the top exporter of aluminium and steel into US. US imports about 1/3 of its 100 million tons that it utilizes, and about 90% of its 5.5 million tons of aluminium that it uses. And Mexico is the 4th largest producer of aluminium. So all these factors combined, so it is not going to hurt America to a great extent as long as Trump goes with his NAFTA allies, wherein of course he's put in some kind of a condition also, and he says that if they do a fair deal with me. He hasn't defined what is that fair deal. So as long as that happens, I will accept that. And there are some exceptions also. It is not that it is being imposed on anybody and everybody. You can always make a representation to the US trade representative for your countries. And supposing you are a security, if you have a security relationship with the USA, then again you get considered.
Okay. Sure. Let's broaden the scope of the debate and bring in the WTO as well. Ajay, Sahai, what do the WTO norms state?
The WTO norms clearly state that at no point of time you can exceed the bound rate which you have committed to WTO. And let us keep in mind that US is arguing on a wrong premises. They are saying that since India is imposing 75% duty on a product, US can also impose a higher duty. Whenever we have committed to the bound rate, we have an applied rate, and looking into whatever is the potential, we have committed a bound rate. So if you are going by the WTO discipline, at no point of time you can exceed the applied tariff above the bound rate, and from that perspective I think the 25% or the 10% is a clear violation of the WTO discipline.
Okay. Mr. Shankar, can anybody violate the WTO mechanism, and what kind of a measure do you have in place to punish somebody who violates the mechanism?
First of all, the US Commerce Department has done its homework well. So they have invoked security. Now, security is something which prevails over everything else. But if you exclude the security provision, then the US is in breach. And the WTO has a dispute resolution mechanism, and if a case is taken to WTO, the US is likely to lose. But one thing we have to bear in mind is that the US has believed in US exceptionalism. So any international treaty, any commitment, the US has had a long tradition of taking the view that if it doesn't suit us, we will walk out of it, we will not abide by it. And they are still a superpower. So we have to see how this plays out, and which is why the EU is very keen to find some via media which doesn't involve their either imposing tariffs on other items, or they would like to threaten it and get some meeting ground, middle ground, or to go to the WTO. But it's going to be very tough and interesting, because Mr. Trump is a very different kind of leader, highly personalized, centralized, and for many, sort of decisions taken on impulse, and then he sticks by it. So
sure.
One has to see what happens.
Yeah, one indeed has to see what happens. You'll have to wait and watch the drama unfold in front of us. SK Sarkar, can we expect the WTO to step in, and what can the WTO do in this situation?
Right now, at least if you ask me, I don't foresee that situation right away. I mean, because the national security has been triggered. So once that's done, it's very difficult for them to come in, and they've quoted their act also, which is the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. So it's not a situation in which immediately WTO can step in, and so they will have to watch as to what actually is the effect. And as I said before, also it is not going to cover all countries, even other than NAFTA. I mean, Australia is also another country which might get an exemption here. But even other countries, you can make an representative USTR, and all the other factors do come in. But if you look at look at this whole idea purely from a business point of view, now look at the effect. Your auto and the aerospace industries are affected. Manufacturing, when you say manufacturing, it is from all kinds of appliances to beer cans. I mean, that's what the Americans would understand. Construction gets very badly affected. And even if you look at the new technologies like renewable energy, they also get affected, because steel and aluminium have a great role to play for the critical wind, solar, and storage components. You see, there are very few bankable substitute materials which are available here. So these things, once they get affected, it will actually increase the American price, let's say for renewables, from at least by 3 to 5%. So once that happens, how are you going to compete with the world? So that is the kind of situation which I suppose a very commercially minded America, I think they understand commerce very well, and there would definitely be objections from the business organizations.
Sure. Ajay Sahai, like SK Sarkar and Ajay Shankar have pointed out earlier in the program, that it's not going to be an all-out trade war. That is, of course, not in the offing, at least immediately. So is it safe to say then this is a transient phenomenon and it is not here to stay?
No, in fact, first of all, if you look into the erection of a non-tariff barrier, they are already been built from 2008. In fact, recently an analysis has come which says that top 40 trading countries have imposed around 4,500 initiative which may be termed as a non-tariff barrier, or you may call them as protectionist measures also. But point is that the increasing of tariffs is something which is quite visible, and we react to that. I'm firmly of the view that if the objective is to bring jobs back to the US, that may not succeed, because the jobs are not being lost because of the trade or because of the immigration. It is because of the technology, and most of the advanced economies are losing the job because they are not coping with the kind of technology which they are supposed to bring. The future of US and advanced economies lies in bringing new technologies. They won't be able to compete with Asian and African countries so far as manufacturing is concerned, because a lot of manufacturing will still have a very huge component of wages, and since we have the labor arbitrage with us, these countries will definitely succeed. So I am of the view that this may not lead to the trade war. India's best position would be to discuss the matter bilaterally with the US. We have huge trade and business relation with the US. Our bilateral trade is to the tune of around $140 billion, and this $1.5 billion of export should not come in a way where we spoil the relationship, but definitely we should also abide by the principle of the WTO, and we should stand by the countries who want that WTO should intervene in this matter. But the first step would be to bilaterally engage with the US.
Indeed. All right. It's good that you brought up India, Mr. Sahai, because I wanted to talk about how all of this is going to affect India, really. Mr. Shankar, how is India going to be affected by this?
With these tariffs, the impact on us is marginal. But
a protectionist attitude on the whole.
Mr. Trump's rhetoric at times is disturbing, because even now he talked of India along with China. Now, the fact is that China has a huge trade surplus with the US. We are very modest players. So I think we need to somehow get through to the US consciousness that China and India are not alike in terms of their trade imbalances. And we have to hope that pragmatism prevails with Mr. Trump, and that he can claim victory in having fulfilled his election promises, and maybe has more rhetoric going. But when it comes to taking further major decisions, I think US commercial interests are able to persuade him that you can claim victory, and now let's get on with the business of business.
So, so Ajay Sahai
But that's the optimistic hope. But Mr. Trump is unpredictable, so I really don't know where things will go.
Ajay Sahai was talking about keeping the bilateral relationship going with the US. So continuing to engage with the US, is it the way forward?
No, continuing to engage with the US is very important to us, and to persuade the US and those who matter in business and elsewhere that the US-India economic relationship is win-win for both sides. It has been win-win till today, and in the next 10-20 years also it will be win-win for both sides.
Sure.
We will never generate the kind of surpluses China has generated with the US. The trade is broadly balanced, and the trade very often in services helps US companies gain global competitive advantage in the IT sphere and so on and so forth. So I think constructive engagement should be to the advantage of both sides.
Sure. SK Sarkar, is India also turning protectionist? I asked this because some of our import duties are in the nature of protectionism.
Well, you see, we have, I think we have a reasonable explanation for that, because we say that we are a developing nation. So obviously give us a chance to reach your level, and then only then we should be in competition with you. So that is something which the developed countries today are not accepting. So that's something which we need to, like you have this agreement on agriculture, Article 18.4, where it says excess inflation, and doesn't define what is excess inflation, and it's not allowing the developing countries to get into that and explain as to what is excessive inflation. Coming back to Trump, Trump is obviously a very egoistic person, and that we must accept that. And in fact, he compares himself to George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and William McKinley. Mr. Suresh Prabhu has said, he's on record as having said, this is a very unfortunate development. So these factors will have some kind of a, let's hope that it has some kind of a stoppage to what is going to happen, what is playing in Trump's mind. But what we need to do right now is that, you see, we are looking at the Indo-US trade. We are looking at about $500 billion in 2020. Right now, it's about $112 billion only. So to get to that target, I think we'll have to work very hard. And obviously, when these kind of hurdles, these kind of roadblocks come in the way, not that India is greatly affected because of steel and aluminium, but they do have an effect on the products which are made out of these materials, because they are base materials. So that is where I think one has to be very careful, because we need to do a greater amount of trade with the US in the near future.
Ajay, Sahai, close the show.
I'd just like to add one thing, that whatever import duties we have raised, they are well within our bound rates with the WTO. So we have
we're not violating anything. Norms.
The second is that they affect not trade with the US, but they affect trade with China primarily, and China has a huge trade surplus with us. So the trade problem of the US with China, the trade problem of India with China is in some ways similar.
Sure.
So if we are looking at ways which allows us to create jobs in India and get competitive advantage in a short period of time, and Mr. Sahai was right, that if you are getting investments in an area where you will get competitive advantage, it makes some sense to use the WTO bound rates. And the WTO has another provision of safeguard duty, which is for 3-4 years, in which case you can help your industry become competitive.
Indeed. All right.
So we are well within that framework.
Sure. Ajay, Sahai, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on what India needs to do going forward.
No, in fact, let me first put it that US is unduly worried about the trade deficit with India, because if you look at the huge order which we have placed for the Boeing and the kind of defense equipment we are supposed to get from the US, coupled with the fact that US has become an exporter of petroleum, we are importing petroleum to the tune of around $80 billion. I personally feel in next 3 to 4 years, the issue of trade deficit may not be with the US, it may be the other way trend. But I personally feel that we need to tread the path very carefully. There is no need for any cavalier approach. The best way forward for us is to engage with the US. Looking into our broad interest, we can definitely negotiate on steel and aluminium. Our more concern would be to other products where we have US as a major market, for example, in textile, leather, gems and jewelry.
Sure.
And because if these kinds of development happen in these sectors, we will not lose the major market share, but it will have huge impact on the employment generation in our country also.
All right. Great. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. The consensus here is, of course, that a trade war is not in the offing anytime in the near future. What we are seeing right now is just a transient phenomenon, and it's not here to stay. India needs to be cautious going forward, but remains to be seen what exactly happens with Trump in the near future. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.